I'm going to tell you how one chapter of the Bible, Luke 12, completely changed how I view my personal finances. Jesus' words in this chapter turned my understanding of financial independence upside down, and I think it could do the same for you. So let's jump in. I think generally people fall into one of two categories as personal money managers. They're either natural spenders or natural savers. Now, in American culture as a whole, we are definitely the ultimate consumers. We love to spend money. But in personal finance circles, the savers are viewed as responsible and good with money. Saving a large percentage of your income in the pursuit of financial independence is celebrated. And I think that's generally been the advice of Christian financial advisors. Save a portion of your income, the more the better, and also give some to your church and/or charity. There are several verses we tend to turn to when thinking about money. For example, 1 Timothy 6:10, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil." Matthew 6:24, "You cannot serve both God and money." And I think we apply these verses to materialism, or at least I should say this is how I've applied these verses in the past. Basically to say, live within your means and don't go into debt chasing after material possessions. So for the natural saver in me, I felt like I was doing a decent job of biblical stewardship. But then I read Luke 12 and it made me rethink everything. Let's look at that in the NIV. Luke 12 verses 13 to 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." As I've thought through this passage over the last few years, I've realized that I am the modern version of the rich fool in the parable. The one who says, "I have more than I need. What should I do? I'll stash it in my 401k, IRAs, and investment accounts. Then before long, I'll be financially independent. I can retire early and take it easy from there." That's the exact mindset of this guy in the parable. He's one of these natural savers. He doesn't go out and spend all of his surplus. He stores it so he'll have grain saved up for the future, and now he can take life easy. What a wise and responsible choice, right? But Jesus says this man is a fool. Why? Because he stored up things for himself and he wasn't rich toward God. And so I think this should speak to the natural savers like myself who are aggressively pursuing financial independence. It should make us stop and consider whether we're doing the same thing as the rich fool. Are we oversaving? Are we hoarding? What's all this money for anyways? To be clear, Jesus' message here isn't that saving money is foolish. There are plenty of verses that talk about the wisdom of saving, such as Proverbs 21:20, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down." The foolishness of the man in the parable was not that he was saving for the future, or even necessarily that he was rich. In verse 15, Jesus lays out the main message of the parable when he says, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." So the rich fool was foolish because he was greedy. He was storing up possessions for himself and he wasn't rich toward God. Now, I'm a financial advisor, and so I'm interested in the practical implications of the Bible's teaching on money. What does it mean practically to be rich toward God? What does that mean for how we give, how we invest, how we save for retirement, and how we insure against risk? I think these are all really interesting questions, and Jesus touches on this if we read on. Here's Luke 12:22 to 31. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. So Jesus tells us not to be so anxious about providing for ourselves in the future. Look at the birds and how God provides for them, he says. How much more will he provide for us who are made in his image? But I think the overarching goal of financial independence is about not relying on anyone, including God, for our future comfort and security. However, the nature of our place as human beings is to be dependent on God. In Exodus 16, God provides manna from heaven for the Israelites, but he specifically tells them to only gather enough for that day, except before the Sabbath when they could gather enough for 2 days. So he was teaching them a profound lesson, the same one Jesus is touching on in Luke 12. He was teaching them to rely on God for their daily provision rather than stockpiling resources out of self-reliance or fear. Being independent and self-reliant is outside the bounds of God's design, which is why I think for many of us, myself included, the striving for financial independence produces anxiety rather than the contentment that we expect. Whether we like it or not, we aren't in control of the future. We'll never be fully 100% financially independent because something could always happen that we don't anticipate. And we can try to fight against that and prepare for every bad scenario we can think of, or we can let go of the need to control the future and trust God. At this point, you may be thinking, so what? I'm not supposed to save any money for the future or for retirement? And I just hope that food shows up on my table each day? Well, no, I don't think Jesus is against the idea of emergency funds, retirement accounts, or building up assets for the future. As with a lot of Jesus' teaching, it comes down to where our heart's at. Here's Jesus again in Luke 12:32-34. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I think it comes down to our approach. Are we clinging so tightly to the goal of financial independence that we ignore opportunities to give to our church or people in need? Are we striving for that financial freedom so that we can feel like we're in complete control over our future? And also, what's the plan when we reach financial independence? Are we going to be like the rich fool and sit back and take life easy? Or are we going to use our freedom and resources to serve others? I think it's absolutely possible to pursue financial independence and be rich toward God while doing so. It does mean, though, that you're going to reach financial independence later than you otherwise could have, because we are called to be generous, radically generous by our culture's standard. And so the very nature of giving means we're getting rid of assets that could have gotten us to financial independence sooner. And as we try to strike a balance between saving and giving, I think we should err on the side of giving. I love this quote from John Piper in Desiring God. God is not glorified when we keep for ourselves, no matter how thankfully, what we ought to be using to alleviate the misery of unevangelized, uneducated, unmedicated, and unfed millions. The evidence that many professing Christians have been deceived by this doctrine is how little they give and how much they own. God has prospered them, and by an almost irresistible law of consumer culture, baptized by a doctrine of health, wealth, and prosperity, they have bought bigger and more houses, newer and more cars, fancier and more clothes, better and more meat, and all manner of trinkets and gadgets and containers and devices and equipment to make life more fun. They will object, does not the Old Testament promise that God will prosper his people? Indeed, God increases our yield so that by giving, we prove that our yield is not our God. God does not prosper a man's business so that he can move from a Ford to a Cadillac. God prospers a business so that 17,000 unreached peoples can be reached with the gospel. He prospers a business so that 12% of the world's population can move a step back from the precipice of starvation. This may sound radical, and it is relative to what our culture teaches us, but it's what Jesus and the rest of the Bible teaches. Now, this video is not an exhaustive take on this topic. There's a lot more that we can pull out of this passage in Luke and related passages in the Bible to inform us how to be better stewards with our money. But I think this is an underexplored topic. There are a lot of YouTube channels on personal finance and general financial planning strategies, but there are very few, if any, that talk through how Christians should think about these things differently. And so we end up basically following the cultural view of money with a little Jesus and charitable giving sprinkled in. But I think this view is incomplete at best. In their book, True Riches, John Cortines and Gregory Balmer put it this way. On the rare day that we learn about money in church, we usually hear about a formulaic life plan that looks something like this. Get out of debt, achieve home ownership, save for retirement, live a comfortable, secure life. Just be sure to give 10% of your income away. Follow this path faithfully, and you'll become stable and secure, maybe even rich. This formula basically teaches us to do exactly what the culture around us does, with a special emphasis on staying debt-free and giving 10% away. It puts a nice Christian halo over the American dream. That is so true, and I think it has left a big gap in the Christian's understanding of how to be faithful with our money. I think a fuller view should attempt to answer questions like, what's the right split between spending, saving, and giving? What does retirement for a Christian look like? Should we be investing differently? How much is enough? And ultimately, what are some effective strategies we can use to be rich toward God with our money? Those are big questions and not something I can explore in one video, but they are questions that I want to tackle in future videos on this channel. Now, I'm not a biblical scholar, and so I want to make sure I'm staying in my lane, which is financial planning and guidance. I'm not going to offer any new or unique interpretations of scripture. Instead, I'm going to take the interpretations and lessons from those who are qualified in that area, and I'm going to do what I'm good at, offering practical financial strategies to implement that biblical wisdom. So if this resonates at all with you, and you're curious how to be wise and Christ-centered with your money, then make sure you hit subscribe, because that's what we're going to dig into in future videos. I'll be back in the next video talking about a practical approach to faithful saving, spending, and giving. See you then.